5-year-old girl rode a winter bus alone, wearing an oversized apron and carrying her sick mother's resume. She walked into a billionaire's glass tower with nothing but courage. What happened next shattered his lonely empire and rewrote 3 lives forever. Gullhaven Harbor wore winter like a bruised salt wind-wet asphalt and dock lights trembling in the rain. The city moved fast for people who had somewhere warm to go. Callie Reyes didn't. She sat alone on a night bus small enough that the seat swallowed her. Her boots didn't reach the floor. She hugged a backpack to her chest like it could keep her steady. Over her clothes, she wore something that didn't belong to her at all, an oversized white housekeeping apron tied and retied until the knot was thick as a fist. The fabric dragged near her ankles. It wasn't cute. It wasn't a costume. It was armor. The window beside her fogged with her breath. Outside the harbor, cranes leaned over black water like tired giants. Callie counted stops in a whisper the way other kids counted stars. 3, 4, 5. Inside her backpack, a folded resume creased soft from being held too tightly, and a sticky note with crooked letters, proof she'd tried to do this the right way. Last night, through thin apartment walls, she'd heard her mom's voice crack on the phone. Lucia tried to sound brave. She failed. Please, just 2 days. The landlord's reply was flat, bored, cruel. Pay by Friday or you're out. After the call, Lucia had cried quietly. Callie listened with her eyes open, staring at the ceiling like she could hold the apartment up with willpower alone. At 5 years old, she learned something children aren't supposed to learn. Sometimes adults don't get saved, so children try to do it themselves. The bus hissed to a stop downtown. Cold air rushed in when the doors opened. Callie stepped onto the sidewalk, a lone apron, fluttering backpack thumping against her spine. She tilted her head back until her neck hurt. Glass rose into the sky. Mercer Vale Tower. Callie swallowed hard, then whispered like a promise to the wind. I'm not going home empty. The lobby felt like a different planet, marble floors, warm lighting, clean air that smelled like expensive soap. Callie's wet sneakers squeaked, and the sound seemed too loud, like she'd broken a rule just by walking. 2 security guards noticed her instantly. One stepped in front of her, gentle but firm, blocking the path like a gate. Hey, sweetie, you okay? Where's your parent? Callie lifted her chin, copying the posture of grown-ups who pretended they weren't scared. I'm here for the interview. The guard blinked. What interview? Callie's fingers shook as she pulled the folded resume from her backpack and held it out with both hands. The paper bent a little from her grip. Housekeeping, she said. My mom is sick, but she can work. She always works. The second guard glanced at the apron, then at her face. His expression changed, confusion first, then something tighter. A receptionist stood from behind the desk, her name tag catching the light. She didn't smile. She didn't scold. She simply looked, really looked at the tiny girl in an adult apron, trembling without making a sound. What's your name? The receptionist asked softly. Callie Rowan Reyes, and your mother's name, Lucia Reyes. The receptionist typed, eyes narrowing. Her face shifted when the appointment appeared on the screen, real scheduled today. Callie's throat burned. She could feel her heart pounding in her ears. For a terrifying second, she imagined being escorted out the doors, spinning behind her, the city swallowing her whole. The receptionist pressed a button on her headset, voice lowered like a secret. Ms. Hart, we have an unusual situation at reception. Callie hugged the resume to her chest again, as if it could protect her. The guards hovered, unsure whether to treat her like a child or a problem. Callie wasn't either. She was a deadline in a 5-year-old body. She waited beneath the glass and marble, staring up at elevators that looked like they belonged to other lives, whispering to herself so she wouldn't fall apart. Please, please, please. 48 floors above the harbor. Dorian Vale Mercer stood at his office window like a man watching life happen to other people. Below Gullhaven glittered dock lights, ferry horns, rain streaking the dark water. The skyline wore his name in steel. He felt nothing. At 45, Dorian had everything men chase their entire lives. Towers, contracts, control. But the quiet in his penthouse wasn't peaceful. It was punishing. His wife had been gone 5 years. Cancer didn't negotiate. His son lived across the country, busy with a family that didn't include this empty view. Dorian encouraged the distance. It hurt less than admitting how lonely his evenings were. The intercom buzzed, sharp, intrusive. He frowned. Bryn Hart never interrupted him after hours unless it mattered. Mr. Mercer Bryn's voice came through professional, but strained. Yes, there's a child in the lobby. Dorian turned slightly. A child? Yes, sir. A little girl. She says she's here for the housekeeping interview. Dorian's eyebrows lifted, then drew together. Housekeeping. The appointment is real, Bryn added quickly. But the child is alone. She brought her mother's resume, and she's wearing an adult housekeeping apron. Something cold stirred in Dorian's chest, an old, unwanted memory of hospitals and bleach and helplessness. He could have done what he always did, delegate. Dismiss. Return to the window and the silence. But the word apron hooked him like a finger under the ribs. How long has she been waiting? He asked. Nearly 20 minutes. Dorian stared at his reflection in the glass-tailored suit, silver at the temple's eyes carved by control. Tired eyes. His late wife's voice drifted through his mind like a ghost. Success means nothing if you have no one to share the view with. Dorian exhaled slowly. Another night alone. Another dinner eaten over the sink. Another reminder that an empire could still be devastatingly quiet. Send her up, he heard himself say. Bryn paused. Sir, I'll speak with her myself. The line went silent. Then Bryn's voice returned, relieved, careful. Yes, Mr. Mercer. Dorian didn't know why he'd said yes, only that for the first time in years, the quiet in his office didn't feel empty. It felt like something was coming. The office doors opened with a soft hush, like the building was holding its breath. Callie stepped in and stopped. Glass walls, towering shelves of awards, a view so high it made her stomach dip. Everything was clean, sharp, expensive, like a place where a 5-year-old should never be. Her oversized apron dragged near her ankles. The knot at her back looked too tight, too thick, like she'd tied it with panic instead of string. Rain had dampened the hem. Her hair clung to her cheeks. Across the room, Dorian Vale Mercer came around his desk, and then did something no one had seen him do in years. He lowered himself to one knee. The motion looked strange on him, like humility didn't fit right at first. But he stayed there eye level with her voice calm. Hi, he said gently. I'm Dorian Mercer. Callie swallowed. Her fingers cramped around the folded resume in her backpack. She pulled it out with both hands and held it toward him, like it was the last thing keeping her alive. My name is Callie Rowan Reyes, she said, trying to sound older than 5. I'm here for the housekeeping job. Dorian's gaze flicked to the apron. Your mother sent you. Callie's chin lifted. She's sick. Fever. She couldn't stand. Her voice wobbled for one heartbeat, then steadied again. But she's not lazy. She always works. Dorian took the resume carefully, as if paper could bruise. Up close, he saw it, the exhaustion behind her wide eyes, the kind that came from listening through walls at night, the kind that didn't belong to childhood. Behind Callie, Bryn, Hart stood near the closed doors, hands clasped, watching like she was afraid the girl might vanish. Dorian kept his posture low, his tone careful. How did you get here? Callie hesitated. The truth was heavy. Bus, she whispered. Alone. The word hung in the air like a siren. Dorian's jaw tightened. He didn't scold her. He didn't flinch. He just said quietly, like a promise, "Okay, you're safe now." Dorian unfolded the resume slowly. Lucia Reyes, night sanitation, hospital overnight, private homes, reliable, bilingual, 15 years of survival packed into neat lines. But it wasn't the typed words that hit him. It was the handwriting at the top added like Lucia didn't trust the page to speak for her. Single mother. My daughter Callie is my everything. Dorian stared too long. His eyes burned and he hated that a single line could do that to him, make him feel like a fraud sitting inside all this glass. Callie watched his face like she was waiting for a verdict. She wrote this about you, Dorian said softly, tapping the sentence with one finger. Callie's voice rushed out, defensive and small. She's not trying to make you feel sorry. She just wants you to know I'm not trouble. Dorian leaned forward. Why didn't you reschedule the interview? Callie looked down at the apron in her lap and smoothed it like it was a blanket. Her answer came out too adult, like it had been carved into her. Because the landlord doesn't reschedule. The words landed hard. Dorian's mind flashed his son at 5 warm pajamas cartoons problems measured in spilled juice. Then he imagined Callie's apartment, thin walls, cold floors, a mother whispering fear into a phone. What happened last night? He asked, voice steady but quieter now. Callie swallowed. Mom asked for more time. She said she was sick, but she'd work anyway. Her fingers tightened in the apron fabric. The landlord said if we don't pay Friday, we have to leave. Dorian felt the room shift, like the temperature dropped. And your mom has fever today, he said. Callie nodded fast. She tried to get up. She fell back down. Her eyes shimmered, but she blinked hard, refusing tears. She said she can't miss this, so I came. Dorian's throat tightened. A 5-year-old carrying an eviction notice in her bones. He forced his voice gentle. You should never have had to do that, he said. Callie lifted her eyes, fierce and wounded. But I did, she whispered. Because nobody else would. Dorian inhaled slowly, like he was trying to keep his anger from spilling in the wrong direction. How did you know where to go? He asked. Callie's shoulders rose and fell. Mom taught me. She spoke like she'd rehearsed it. Stay where the lights are. Don't talk to strangers. Count the stops. Dorian's chest tightened. Those weren't childhood lessons. Those were survival rules. And your mom? She knows you're here, he asked carefully. Callie nodded quickly. I left a note. A note, Dorian repeated, and the word tasted like ice. Callie dug into her backpack and pulled out a crumpled, sticky note. The handwriting was big and messy, some letters crooked. Mommy, I'm helping. Please don't be mad. I love you. Dorian stared at it, and for a second he could see the scene too clearly. Lucia waking up feverish, reaching for her child, finding cold sheets and that note. The panic that follows. The kind that turns your blood into knives. Callie's voice trembled. She'll be scared, but I didn't want her to miss the interview. If we lose the apartment, we lose everything. Dorian stood abruptly and paced 2 steps, then stopped. His reflection in the glass looked powerful, controlled, until you looked at the eyes. He turned back and crouched again in front of her, closer now. Callie, he said, slow and deliberate, you are not in trouble. Callie blinked, not believing him yet. You are not too small to matter, he continued. You walked into a tower full of adults and carried your mother's dream in your hands. Her lower lip shook. She pressed it between her teeth, fighting tears like they were weakness. Dorian glanced to the door. Bryn Hart was still there, tense, protective. Get me Lucia Reyes' number from the application, Dorian ordered, voice suddenly steel. Bryn moved instantly. Dorian looked back at Callie, softer again. First he said gently, we call your mom. We tell her you're safe. Callie whispered, broken and brave, please, don't let her be mad. Brinhart returned with the phone already unlocked, a single name glowing on the screen. Lucia Reyes. Dorian took it carefully, like the weight of it mattered. He pressed call, 1 ring, 2, then a broken inhale. Callie Lucia's voice came through raw, hoarse, soaked in fear. "Baby, where are you?" Callie leaned forward so fast her apron slipped from one shoulder. "Mommy, I'm okay. I'm okay. Please don't cry." Dorian raised the phone. "Ms. Reyes, my name is Dorian Mercer." Silence. Then a sob, deep and shaking. "I woke up and she was gone," Lucia cried. "I couldn't stand. My phone fell. I missed the interview. I know what that means. Please, I'm so sorry." Dorian closed his eyes for a heartbeat. "No," he said calmly. "You didn't miss it." Lucia's breathing hitched. "What your daughter came to interview for you," Dorian said. And I listened. Callie watched his face like she was watching a door unlock. "Right now," Dorian continued, "I need you to drink water and rest. Your daughter is safe." Lucia whispered, small and ashamed, "Mr. Mercer, I don't want charity." Dorian opened his eyes. "This isn't charity. This is someone finally seeing you." Callie leaned close to the phone, whispering fiercely, "I love you, Mommy." Lucia broke. "I love you more than anything. I was so scared. You don't have to be alone in it anymore," Dorian said quietly. He ended the call slowly, as if hanging up too fast might undo the moment. Callie wiped her cheeks with the edge of the apron, smearing faint bleach marks across the fabric. "Is she mad?" Callie asked, barely breathing. Dorian shook his head. "No, she's relieved." Callie nodded, storing that truth away. "She cries when she's relieved," she murmured. Dorian felt something inside him shift, soft, irreversible. Dorian turned his chair fully toward Callie, no desk between them. "Your mother applied for a housekeeping position in one of our buildings," he said. Callie sat up straight, her hands folded in the apron like she was ready to be judged again. "She has experience," Dorian continued, "and more than that, she has integrity." Callie's voice trembled. "So, she gets the job." Dorian didn't answer immediately. He stood, walked to his desk, and set the resume down with care. Then he pushed it aside. "I don't think housekeeping is enough," he said. Callie froze. Her eyes widened, not with excitement, but fear. Adults changed their minds. Promises broke. This felt like the moment things went wrong. "What do you mean?" she whispered. Dorian met her gaze. "Your mother doesn't just clean, she manages chaos." Callie's brow furrowed. "Chaos. She works nights, days. She keeps a home together while sick." His voice sharpened with truth. "That's leadership." Callie stared, unsure if she was allowed to believe him. "I want to offer your mother a position managing our residential housekeeping teams," Dorian said. "Across multiple buildings." Callie's mouth opened, then closed. "Like the boss?" "Yes," Dorian said simply. "And it comes with salary," he added. "Health insurance. Paid leave." Callie's breath caught. "And a 2-bedroom apartment," Dorian continued, "in one of our safe buildings. Heat included. Close to school." For a long moment, Callie didn't move. Then her voice broke. "We wouldn't have to leave." Dorian shook his head once. "No." Her face crumpled. She tried to stop it. She couldn't. A small, quiet sob escaped, relief leaking out after months of fear. Dorian leaned forward. "Tonight you go home. You sleep. And you let adults carry what you've been carrying." Callie nodded, crying and smiling at the same time. Dorian insisted on driving Callie home himself. Brinhart hesitated. "Sir, security." Dorian's voice was firm. Security didn't ride a winter bus alone at 5. That ended the discussion. The city wrapped around them as the car moved through wet streets and glowing signals. Harbor lights blurred into gold streaks across the windshield. Callie sat in the back seat, the apron pulled up like a blanket. Her eyelids drooped, then snapped open again. "Are you mad at me?" she asked suddenly. Dorian checked the mirror. Her eyes were huge, anxious. "No," he said. "I'm mad at a world that made you think you had to do this." Callie's voice came soft, almost sleepy. "Most people don't help." Dorian didn't argue. "Then we'll be different." Silence settled thick but not heavy. They passed old apartment buildings with flickering hallway lights. Dorian saw them differently now, not as properties, but as places where children might lie awake listening for footsteps. Callie whispered. "My mom tries to smile when she's scared." Dorian's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "So do you." Callie's eyes fluttered. "I'm not brave." "You are," Dorian said quietly, "even when you don't know it yet." They turned onto a quieter street. A modest brick building appeared tired but standing. Callie sat up, panic waking her. "If Mommy's crying, I'll help," Dorian said. The car stopped. The front door flew open. Lucia ran out into the cold, pale and shaking sweater too thin for winter. Callie opened the door, and Lucia dropped to her knees, pulling her child into her arms, like she was afraid the night might steal her back. Dorian stood aside, letting the moment happen. In the glow of the streetlight, fear finally let go. And something like a future took its first breath. Lucia Reyes hit the sidewalk without caring that her legs were weak. She ran anyway. The cold sliced through her thin sweater, but she didn't feel it. All she saw was the back door of a dark car opening, and her daughter, small and whole, stepping out into the light. Callie Lucia dropped to her knees and wrapped her arms around her child so tightly, Callie made a soft sound of surprise. Lucia buried her face in Callie's hair, breathing her in like air after drowning. "Oh my God. Oh my God," Lucia sobbed. "I woke up and you were gone." "I thought I'm here," Callie whispered, clinging back just as hard. "I didn't get taken. I left a note. I counted the stops." Lucia shook her tears, soaking Callie's apron. "I saw the note. I couldn't stand. I tried to call, my phone fell. I was so scared." Callie pulled back just enough to look at her mother's face. "I didn't want you to miss the interview." Lucia's heart broke all over again. "You should never have had to do that." A man's voice spoke gently behind them. "She's extraordinary, but you're right, she never should have." Lucia looked up at Dorian Vale Mercer standing a respectful distance away. Powerful, composed, and somehow careful, like he was afraid to step on something fragile. "I don't know how to thank you," Lucia said hoarsely. Dorian shook his head once. "You already did." He held out a folder. Clean, neat, real. "Please rest tonight," he said. "Tomorrow we talk details." Lucia stared at the folder, hands trembling. "This is not charity," Dorian said calmly. "A job offer, a lease, benefits." Callie looked up between them. "Mommy, are we okay?" Lucia swallowed hard, then nodded, voice shaking but sure. "We're okay." She pulled Callie close again, holding her like she was 5 seconds from disappearing. Dorian took a step back, giving them space. Then he turned to leave. "Mr. Mercer," Callie called. He turned. "Are you going to be lonely again?" The question landed heavier than any accusation. Dorian looked at the little girl in the oversized apron, then at the mother who had raised her with nothing but courage. "No," he said quietly. "Not after tonight." As he walked away, Lucia pressed her forehead to Callie's and whispered through tears, "You saved us." And Callie, finally safe enough to say it out loud, answered, "No, Mommy. We saved each other." Morning arrived without fear. Lucia woke to pale winter light filtering through thin curtains and the steady warm weight of Callie curled against her side. For a moment, Lucia lay still, afraid to move, afraid the night before might dissolve if she breathed too loudly. Then she saw the folder on the kitchen table. It was still there. Lucia sat up slowly, her body weak but lighter than it had felt in years. Her fever had broken sometime before dawn. Sweat cooled on her skin. Her mind felt clearer, still tired, but not hunted. She opened the folder with shaking hands. Position Residential Operations Supervisor Salary. A number she had never dared imagine: benefits, health insurance, paid leave, stability, housing, 2-bedroom apartment, heat included, near a school. Lucia pressed her hand to her mouth and sank into the chair. Silent tears fell not from pain, but from release. Bare feet padded across the floor. Callie stood in the doorway, hair-wild eyes searching. The apron was folded neatly over a chair now, like a retired uniform. Mommy, Callie asked. Did I mess up? Lucia rushed to her and knelt, gripping Callie's shoulders. No. You didn't mess up. You changed everything. Callie blinked. Is it real? Lucia nodded, voice trembling. It's real. Callie's face crumpled. She tried to be brave. She failed. She leaned into her mother, whispering the question that had haunted her nights. Does this mean we don't have to listen to phone calls anymore? Lucia closed her eyes and hugged her tight. No more. No more counting days. No more packing bags in your head. Callie sagged against her like a ceiling had been lifted. Later that morning, Lucia dressed carefully. Clean sweater, hair tied back. She looked older than her years, but steadier. At 10 a.m., she sat in a conference room flooded with winter light across from Dorian Mercer. Callie waited outside with Bryn Hart coloring quietly. The apron rested on the back of a chair like a silent witness. This role isn't charity, Dorian said firmly. Lucia met his eyes. I wouldn't accept it if it were. Dorian nodded. Good. He explained the job. Authority, responsibility, trust. Lucia swallowed. I've never managed people. Dorian didn't hesitate. You've managed a crisis for 5 years. This will be easier. Lucia's eyes filled, but she didn't look away. Thank you, she said quietly, for seeing me. Dorian shook his head. Your daughter made sure I didn't miss you. Dorian stood and opened the conference room door. Callie looked up instantly, crayon still in her hand. Her eyes darted to her mother's face, searching for danger. Lucia knelt in front of her and took both her small hands. It's official, Lucia whispered. Callie froze. We're okay. Lucia nodded, tears finally free. We're okay. Callie's breath hitched. She cried hard, loud this time, months of fear finally spilling out now that it was safe. Lucia held her, rocking gently, whispering promises she could finally keep. Dorian watched from the doorway, something tightening in his chest. Not pride, not power. Gratitude. Come, he said softly. I want to show you something. He led them into his office. The city stretched behind the glass harbor lights, flickering like a held breath. Dorian removed a framed award from the wall and replaced it with Lucia's resume. Callie tilted her head. Why are you putting Mommy's paper there? Dorian crouched beside her. Because it reminds me of what matters. Lucia swallowed. You don't have to do that. I do, Dorian said simply. He turned the frame slightly so Callie could see the handwritten line at the top. My daughter is my everything. Callie traced the glass with one finger. Will you forget us? She asked suddenly. The honesty of it cut deep. Dorian didn't smile. He didn't soften the truth. No, he said. I won't. He reached into his desk, tore a page from a small notebook, and wrote something quickly. He handed it to Lucia. My number, he said. If the landlord calls again, or if the world starts pressing too hard, you call me. Lucia stared, stunned. Mr. Mercer Dorian, he corrected gently. Callie clutched her mother's hand. For the first time, her shoulders relaxed, not completely, but enough. As they left the office, Callie glanced back once more at the framed resume. It looked strange there, out of place, and yet, exactly where it belonged. Outside, Gullhaven Harbor glowed in winter light. Inside, Dorian Mercer's tower, something invisible but essential, had shifted. Not a deal, not a contract, a direction. and none of them would ever walk the same way again. Change didn't arrive with headlines or applause. It came the way winter sunlight does, thin at first, then steady enough to warm skin you'd forgotten was cold. Lucia Reyes began her new role the following Monday. She arrived early, notebook tucked under her arm, hair pulled back with the same practical care she'd used for years. Only now she wasn't cleaning other people's messes in silence. She was organizing teams, checking schedules, solving problems before they turned sharp. She listened. She remembered names. She noticed exhaustion before it collapsed into mistakes. People noticed that. By the end of the first week, maintenance supervisors stopped bracing when she approached. By the end of the first month, they sought her out. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't threaten. She simply understood what it meant to hold a job together with frayed hands. At home, the apartment changed shape. The lights stayed on. The heater hummed like a promise. Callie slept through the night for the first time in months, no jerking awake, no whisper-counting days. The oversized apron, now clean and folded, rested on the back of a chair. It no longer needed to be worn. But Callie still touched it sometimes just to make sure. Dorian Mercer noticed the changes last. He noticed them when he began leaving meetings early, not because he was bored, but because he wanted to be somewhere else. He noticed when his penthouse stopped echoing, when he started eating dinner sitting down, when silence didn't feel like punishment anymore. One evening, Callie sat at his kitchen island, legs swinging, working through a puzzle with intense seriousness. Dorian watched from across the room, unsure when exactly the moment had shifted from helping to belonging. Callie frowned at a piece that didn't fit. "It's wrong," she said firmly. Dorian smiled. "How do you know? Because it doesn't feel right," she answered without hesitation. He laughed softly. "That's surprisingly accurate." Callie looked up at him, eyes sharp. "You work too much." The bluntness startled him. "Do I?" She nodded. "You used to. Now you don't." That stopped him. Lucia watched from the doorway, arms folded loosely. "She's not wrong," she said gently. Dorian felt something ease, like a knot he hadn't known he was carrying had loosened without permission. Later that night, alone in his office, Dorian stood at the window where everything had begun. The city glowed the same way it always had, but the reflection in the glass was different. Behind him, shoes by the door that weren't his. A child's drawing taped slightly crooked to the wall, a framed resume where an award used to hang. He wasn't counting hours anymore. He was living them. The first real storm hit Gullhaven in December. Rain turned to ice. Wind howled through alleyways like a warning siren. In the older buildings Dorian used to see only as spreadsheets, families huddled under thin blankets listening to heaters struggle. Dorian stood in the lobby of Mercer Vale Tower watching tenants shuffle past with wet boots and tight collars. A maintenance worker rubbed his hands together for warmth, jaw clenched with fatigue. A question echoed in Dorian's mind, small and persistent. "Do they feel invisible?" He turned to Bryn Hart. "Get Lucia." Lucia arrived in minutes, coat buttoned, eyes clear. She already knew why she'd been called. "I've sent extra crews to the older blocks," she said before he could speak. "Salt on the steps. Space heaters distributed." Dorian nodded. "I want more." Lucia studied him. "Define more." He reached for a notepad and wrote 3 words at the top. "The winter program." "No tenant of ours sleeps in a car," Dorian said. "Not this winter. Not ever." Lucia didn't smile. She nodded like a commander receiving orders. "Emergency housing. Temporary units. Clear criteria." "Food support," Dorian added. "Partner kitchens, vouchers, deliveries to seniors." Lucia was already writing. "We'll need a hotline. Multilingual. Do it." She looked up. Childcare. Dorian hesitated, then saw Callie on the bus again, counting stops like a prayer. "Yes," he said. "After-school safe rooms, warm lights. No kid waits alone." Lucia's voice softened. That's infrastructure. Dorian nodded. Charity disappears. Infrastructure stays. The program rolled out quietly. Hallway lights replaced flickering bulbs. Insulation upgrades moved forward months. Community rooms opened late on storm nights with soup and cocoa. People noticed. Not because banners were hung, but because fear loosened its grip. One afternoon, Callie walked into the office holding a tote bag of donated gloves, serious as a general. "We're helping," she announced. Lucia tried not to laugh. Dorian didn't try at all. Callie handed him a clipboard. "Who doesn't have coats?" Dorian blinked. "You made a list." Callie nodded. "Lists fix things." Lucia watched them, eyes shining. "She learned that from you." Dorian shook his head. "No, I learned it from her." That night, as snow swept across the harbor lights, Dorian realized something sharp and true. He hadn't just changed a company. He'd changed the questions it was built on. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Cream envelope, handwritten address. Dorian recognized the handwriting instantly, his son's. He sat at his desk and turned it over twice before opening it, as if the weight carried more than paper. "Dad, I've been thinking about you." The words were careful, honest. They spoke of distance after his wife died, of silence, of not knowing how to reach a man who had built walls out of work. Dorian read slowly. "For years I thought you locked yourself inside the company because it was all you knew. I didn't blame you. I just didn't know how to reach you." His throat tightened. "Then I came to dinner." Dorian remembered that night Callie explaining her puzzle. Lucia laughing softly, noise filling rooms that used to echo. "I saw you laugh. I saw you kneel to help Callie like it mattered more than your meetings. And I realized something." Dorian leaned back, eyes fixed on the page. "You didn't need someone to fix you. You needed a reason to live again." The sentence hit with quiet force. "I'm sorry I stayed away. Part of it was distance. Part of it was fear that if I came too close, I'd have to admit how much I missed you. And Mom." Dorian swallowed hard. At the bottom of the page, one line ended him. "Mom would have loved the version of you I saw that night." Dorian didn't cry loudly. He sat very still, as something inside him healed quietly, like snow settling after a storm. That evening, he called his son. When the line picked up, Dorian spoke first, voice rough. "I got your letter." A pause. A soft, relieved breath. "I want you to come home more," Dorian said. "Not for meetings. For dinner." Another pause, then a laugh that sounded lighter than Dorian remembered. "We will," his son said. Dorian hung up and stared at the framed resume and folded apron on his wall. Kindness hadn't just saved Lucia and Callie. It had reopened a door he thought was sealed forever. A door back to his own family. And for the first time in years, Dorian Mercer understood something simple and devastating. The greatest returns weren't measured in profit. They were measured in who came back when you finally chose to be seen. By the time spring softened Gullhaven's edges, the apartment Lucia and Callie lived in no longer felt temporary. It breathed. Sunlight reached the kitchen table in the mornings. The heater clicked off on its own because it no longer had to fight the cold. The walls didn't echo with worry. They held laughter, footsteps, small arguments about cereal and shoes and bedtime. Callie grew into routines that didn't revolve around fear. She learned the sound of safety, the low hum of normal life. She learned that mornings could begin without calculating exits, that nights could end without whispering prayers to stay. Still, some habits lingered. She checked locks twice. She counted steps without realizing it. When Lucia noticed, she didn't scold. She simply knelt and hugged her daughter, reminding her softly, "We're home." Dorian visited often, never announced, like an executive, never looming. Sometimes he brought groceries, sometimes books, sometimes nothing but himself. One evening, Callie tugged his sleeve while he stood at the window. "You always stand there when you're thinking," she observed. Dorian smiled faintly. You're very perceptive. Are you thinking about that day? She asked. Yes. Would you do it again? Her voice was careful, like she already knew the answer, but needed to hear it anyway. Dorian didn't hesitate every time. Lucia watched them from the kitchen doorway, heart tight with gratitude. She had seen men like Dorian before, powerful, distant, untouchable. She had never seen one choose to be present. At work, the winter program evolved into policy. Not charity, policy. Emergency housing became standard. Lighting upgrades moved up schedules. After-school rooms stayed open late with staff and snacks. Employees began to bring their children by the office, not out of desperation, but trust. Lucia led it all with quiet authority. You don't build loyalty by being generous, once she told Dorian during a review. You build it by being consistent. Dorian nodded. He was learning to listen without needing to speak. One afternoon, Callie came home with a school assignment, a drawing of family. She had drawn herself, Lucia, and Dorian. 3 figures holding hands beneath a crooked sun. Lucia froze. Sweetheart, you don't have to. Callie looked up, confused. Why not your family? Dorian saw the drawing later that night. He didn't say anything. He just stood there longer than usual, letting the truth settle into his bones. Family didn't always arrive by blood. Sometimes it arrived by courage, and stayed because you chose to open the door. By the time Callie turned 9, she had opinions, serious ones. She sat in the back seat of Dorian's car during one of their now regular business dinners, rain streaking the windows, city lights blurred into color. Why does that building look darker than the others? She asked, pointing toward an older block near the harbor. Dorian glanced over. Older wiring. It's scheduled for upgrades next year. Callie frowned. But people live there now. The words stopped him harder than a missed deadline ever had. At the red light, Dorian saw it clearly, not as a property, not as a line item, but as a place where kids might lie awake listening for footsteps in dim hallways. I'll move it up, he said quietly. Callie nodded, satisfied. That became the pattern. Once a month, the dinners expanded into walking tours. Callie brought a notebook. She asked questions no consultant ever had. Do the janitors get breaks? Where do their kids wait after school? Do they have coats for winter? Dorian started carrying his own notebook again, not for profit forecasts, but for answers. At work, Lucia noticed the shift immediately. You're listening differently, she said one afternoon. Dorian smiled. I'm being trained. Lucia laughed softly. By the best. Policies changed without announcements. Budgets adjusted without resistance. Pride replaced resentment in places Dorian hadn't even known were wounded. Turnover dropped. People stayed. Not because they were trapped, because they were seen. One afternoon, Callie walked into the office carrying a box of donated scarves, serious as a manager. These go to Building C, she announced. An employee grinned. Yes, ma'am. Callie blinked, then smiled shyly. Lucia watched from across the room, eyes wet. You know, she said later, she used to think she was invisible. Dorian looked at Callie, laughing with 2 employees by the coffee machine. She was never invisible, he said. The world just wasn't looking. That night, alone in his office, Dorian stood at the window again. The skyline still wore his name, but the reflection in the glass showed something else now. A man who had stopped measuring success by height and started measuring it by light. The box arrived without warning. Plain cardboard. No return address. Dorian found it waiting on his desk early one morning. Bryn Hart hovered nearby, curious but silent. He opened it slowly. Inside, folded with care, lay the apron. The same oversized white apron Callie had worn that winter day. Cleaned. Pressed. The faint bleach stains still visible. The dark thread still holding the repaired seam together. Beneath it was a note in Lucia's handwriting. I thought it was time you had this back. Callie doesn't need it anymore. but I think you might. Dorian sat down. The weight in his chest surprised him. That evening, he carried the box home instead of leaving it at the office. He laid the apron across the kitchen island. Callie stopped short when she saw it. Her eyes widened, not with fear, not with pain, but recognition. I forgot how big it was, she whispered. Lucia stood beside her. It used to feel heavy. Callie nodded. It did. Like I was holding something too big. Dorian folded the apron slowly. You were, he said, and you carried it anyway. They framed it together that weekend. Not flattened, not hidden. Folded gently like something that might be needed again someday. Not by them, but by someone else. Lucia watched as Dorian hung it beside the framed resume in his office. You don't have to keep it, she said softly. I do, Dorian replied. It reminds me of what Callie asked. That hope isn't loud, he said. Sometimes it just shows up shaking, wearing whatever it can find. Callie considered that, then smiled. Do you think other kids will need aprons like that? She asked. Dorian answered honestly. Yes, she waited, but maybe fewer, he added, if we keep building the world better. Callie nodded, satisfied. That night, snow fell softly over Gullhaven Harbor. Not cruel, not threatening, just quiet. Dorian stood at his window, the framed apron behind him, the city reflected in the glass. He remembered the moment he'd said, send her up a decision, without numbers, without guarantees. Just instinct, just humanity. And he understood now that choice hadn't changed one life. It had rewritten many, including his own. The penthouse hadn't hosted a real gathering in years. Not since before the silence moved in and claimed corners like dust. Now it filled slowly, voices first, then laughter, then the soft chaos of shoes kicked off near the door. Balloons in muted blues and warm golds floated near the ceiling, a little crooked, a little imperfect. A modest cake waited on the Marble Island candles unlit. Callie's 10th birthday. Lucia had suggested cupcakes at home. A movie. Something quiet. Dorian had shaken his head. This matters, he'd said. She matters. When the elevator doors opened, Callie stepped out holding Lucia's hand. She froze. Her eyes swept the room wide and unsure, like she was bracing for something to disappear if she looked too closely. Is this? For me, she whispered. For you, Dorian said. And for the years you didn't get to be a kid. Callie's breath hitched. She didn't run this time. She walked forward slowly, touching a balloon, then the edge of the cake, as if checking that the world was solid. Lucia stood back, hands clasped, overwhelmed. She had cleaned spaces like this before. She had never stood in one as a guest, never as family. When the candles were lit, Callie closed her eyes and made a wish. Dorian wondered what she wished for now when fear no longer owned her nights. The elevator chimed again. Dorian's son stepped out with his children in tow, laughter spilling into the room before anyone spoke. Callie watched, curious. Then one of the kids waved. She waved back, shy but steady. The room filled. Running feet, crumbs on the counter, overlapping voices. Dorian stood in the middle of it all, stunned by how right it felt. His son came to stand beside him. Dad, he said quietly, you seem different. Dorian nodded. I am. What changed? Dorian watched Callie explain a game with serious authority, while Lucia laughed softly nearby. One little girl walked into my office, he said, and asked me to be better. Later, after cake and gifts. Callie sat beside Dorian on the couch, leaning her head against his arm. You're not lonely anymore, she said matter-of-factly. Dorian smiled. No. Good, Callie said, satisfied. Lonely is heavy. That night, after everyone left, Dorian sat alone at the table. But the silence felt different now. It wasn't empty. It was full of echoes. Time unfolded instead of rushing. Lucia Reyes became indispensable. What began as managing housekeeping teams grew into overseeing operations across multiple properties. She fixed problems before they reached Dorian's desk. She advocated for workers others overlooked. She listened and people followed. Not because she was kind, because she was fair. Policies shifted quietly under her leadership. Flexible schedules, emergency housing vouchers, on-site childcare options, winter gear stipends. This isn't charity. Lucia told a room full of managers during one meeting. It's infrastructure. Survival shouldn't be optional. The room listened. Callie grew taller, steadier. Her shoulders no longer hunched like she was bracing for impact. School projects replaced survival plans. Sleep came easier. Once a month, Dorian began a tradition: dinners across Gullhaven Harbor. No phones, he declared. Business meetings. Callie took the title seriously. She commented on lighting in lobbies, on playground layouts, on whether a space felt safe or just looked clean. People can tell the difference, she said once. Dorian adjusted budgets without hesitation. One rainy evening, as they drove past an older building, Callie asked quietly, "Do the people there have somewhere warm to eat?" "Yes," Dorian answered. "They do now." Callie nodded. "Good." At the office, employees learned Callie's name, learned to smile again, learned that the CEO's door was no longer something to fear. Dorian noticed the change in himself last. He stopped measuring days by meetings completed and deals closed. He started measuring them by conversations, by laughter, by whether he showed up. One afternoon, as Callie worked on homework at his kitchen island, she looked up suddenly. "Do you ever miss being lonely?" she asked. Dorian didn't hesitate. "No." She raised an eyebrow. "You answered fast," he laughed. "I miss quiet sometimes." "Not lonely," Callie smiled, satisfied. Outside, the city still glowed vast and busy. Inside, Dorian Mercer understood something he'd never learned in boardrooms. You don't change a company by writing better rules. You change it by changing what and who you're willing to see. 10 years after that winter day, Dorian Mercer didn't call the press. He invited only the people who mattered. Lucia arrived first, now director of operations, her coat tailored, her posture confident. Callie, 15, now stood beside her, no longer small, but still unmistakably herself. The conference room filled with familiar faces. Bryn Hart, Dorian's son and grandchildren. Employees who had stayed not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Dorian stood at the head of the table, glass in hand. "I've given a lot of speeches in my life," he began. "Most of them were about growth, expansion, profit." Callie smiled. "Boring." Laughter rippled through the room. "Yes," Dorian agreed. "Boring." He set the glass down. 10 years ago, a 5-year-old girl took a bus across this city in winter. She wore an oversized apron so I'd take her seriously. She carried a resume because she believed paper could protect her mother. Callie's eyes glistened, but she held her chin high just like she had at 5. "In my entire career," Dorian continued, "I have never seen courage that pure." He gestured toward the window harbor lights flickering like memory. "I used to think success was what I built: towers, contracts, a skyline." His voice softened. "That day taught me something else. The greatest success is who you choose to see." He looked at Callie. "You didn't just save your mother," he said. "You saved me from becoming a man who could look past suffering and call it not my problem." Callie's voice was quiet. "You said yes." Dorian nodded, and everything changed. Later that night, alone in his office, Dorian stood before 2 framed objects: a resume, a folded apron, 10 years, thousands of decisions, hundreds of lives touched, all tracing back to one moment, one choice, one small knock on a door. He turned off the lights and smiled into the dark. Because he understood now, the only empire worth building is the one that makes room for people. And love, in the end, is the highest return. Did this story move your soul? Share your feelings in the comments and rate it from 1 to 10. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Then tap the bell icon so you never miss a new story. Click the end screen to watch another heartfelt video. See you in the next story.